And we think that the UN agencies that have been pressuring Israel not to proceed with an incursion of Rafah, pressuring Israel to leave Hamas on its feet after October 7, now have a choice to make. Do they want to lobby to save Hamas or to save civilians?
Two Israeli hostages have been freed after an operation in Rafah. Fernando Simon Marman, who's 60, and Luis Har, who is 70, were kidnapped on October the 7th by Hamas. The raid was accompanied by a wave of airstrikes. Hamas sources say up to 100 people have died, but we cannot verify that figure. In a moment, we will speak to Noor Odeh, Middle East analyst and former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. But first, let's speak to Eylon Levy, spokesperson for Israel's Prime Minister. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What can you tell us about these two hostages? What kind of condition are they in?
Two hostages back home in a successful rescue mission overnight, another 134 to go. Last night around 2 o'clock in the morning, our forces were able to enter Rafah and successfully extract two hostages who were being held by Hamas terrorists. The forces had to physically shield those hostages with their bodies in order to get them out. They're now safely back in Israeli territory. They are in good and stable health condition, and we are continuing with our campaign to bring all of the hostages home. We remain committed to that pledge. There will be no one left behind.
How many hostages I'm not an exact number, but how many of the ones who are still missing do you think are actually in Rafah?
Hamas abducted 253 people on October 7th, in addition to another 4 hostages. There are still 134 hostages still trapped in Gaza. 31 of them are dead already. We have to presume that the others are alive and fight for them as if every minute counts, because it does. And we assume that many, if not most of them, are in Rafah because the IDF has already destroyed most of Hamas's battalions across Gaza. The reason that we are approaching an incursion in Rafah right now is that Hamas started this war with 24 battalions. The IDF has already smashed 18 of those, 3/4 of Hamas's army. The 2 remaining battalions in Khan Yunis are on their last legs, and that leaves only 4 battalions in Rafah in order to complete the goal of destroying Hamas in response to the October 7 massacre.
All of this is in tandem, of course, with the residents of Gaza who've had to move several times. Many of them, some of them stayed behind and they died, but many have had to move. 1.5 million Palestinians are thought to be sheltering in Rafah, and now Israel say that they're going to attack Rafah because they want to find the rest of Hamas and to kill them. Where should these people go to stay safe?
Well, the Prime Minister has ordered the IDF to come up with a plan for how civilians can be evacuated. We know that if we were to enter all guns blazing, the results could be devastating. And so we think it is important, in order to keep civilians protected from Hamas, which is trying to use them as human shields, trying to hide behind them, that civilians should get out of harm's way to safety. There are areas in the Gaza Strip where that can be done. We designated a safe zone at the beginning of this war. There are, of course, areas north of Rafah, areas that have already been cleared of Hamas. And we think that the UN agencies that have been pressuring Israel not to proceed with an incursion of Rafah, pressuring Israel to leave Hamas on its feet after October 7, now have a choice to make. Do they want to lobby to save Hamas or to save civilians? Because if they are going to pressure Israel not to fight Hamas and keep civilians in a Hamas stronghold, where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields, the cost could be very high. And we urge them to work with us as we try to evacuate civilians to safety and get them out of a war zone where Hamas terrorists are trying to use them as human shields. Unfortunately, that is Hamas's only strategy for trying to survive this war.
But so you mentioned the UN. The UN humanitarian coordinator, Jamie McGoldrick, who's just been to Gaza, says that people in Rafah would have nowhere to go if you launch your offensive. The safe areas that were declared are no longer safe. And if these people have to move, where can they move? We're really fearful of the horrific nature of where we are could only get worse. Are you suggesting, I don't know if you are, but I just want to clarify, that 1.5 million people should move to open areas? And how would they survive there?
Well, let's have a look at what the options are at the moment. Hamas has 4 battalions that are still fighting in Rafah. And in order to secure security for Israel and also for the Palestinian people the day after Hamas, the Hamas terrorist army has to be destroyed. This war cannot end after the October 7 massacre, with Hamas declaring victory or even claiming a draw. And that's why it is important to get civilians out of harm's way to safety. We do not want to conduct an operation against Hamas in Rafah while civilians are in the way, because it's dangerous for them. Now, Hamas's strategy is to try to hide behind them. That's why all the tunnel shafts poke out inside schools and homes, hospitals, even UN facilities. Unfortunately, since the beginning of this war, UN agencies have been resisting Israel's efforts to get civilians to safety. We say that under our obligations under international law, we should get civilians out of harm's way from a war zone, and they from day one have tried to condemn that as forcible displacement, astonishingly, as we comply with our obligations to give precaution and warning for civilians to evacuate areas where terrorists are trying to use them as human shields.
Eylon Levy, the thing is, of course, that both. Sorry, we're running out of time, so I just wanted to press this point. Both things can be true at the same time, I suppose, can't they? That you don't want Hamas to be protected, you want them to be eliminated, you want to go in there and get them, but at the same time, you do have to consider the welfare of 1.5 million people who are in a terrible state already. They've moved twice, many of them. And now they don't understand where they're supposed to go. They're supposed to go to tents somewhere. And I just want you to address the humanitarian point. I don't necessarily want to keep talking about Hamas, as important as that is.
It's very important that you mentioned that. Our policy is that we want to see as much humanitarian aid entering Gaza as possible. We've not only placed no restrictions on food, water, medicine, or shelter equipment, we have excess capacity at our crossings for more aid to enter the Gaza Strip. But it is important that the aid reach civilians who need it, and not Hamas that has been stealing it.
Okay.
And our intelligence estimates are that Hamas has been stealing up to 60% of that aid. Now, the best thing for civilians would be, ideally, if Hamas were to surrender, lay down its weapons, release the hostages, turn over its war criminals. Since that isn't going to happen, we're going to have to fight the Hamas terrorist army that tells us it wants to do October 7 again.
You're talking about Hamas again. I know, and I understand this is the whole point of this, but we cannot ignore 1.5 million people. You say that they're going to go to these open areas. Eylon Levy, will they be safe there? Can you guarantee that they will be safe there, that they will not be killed?
We will do everything we can to keep civilians protected. And if Hamas is not operating from inside those areas, there's no reason why anyone should be hurt, because we are targeting Hamas. And we want civilians to get out of the areas where Hamas is using them as human shields right now, so that they can be out of the line of fire while Hamas is trying to keep them in the line of fire. And it's unfortunate that they've been funneled into these Hamas strongholds. We want them out of the way so we can continue fighting Hamas terrorists with no civilians in the way.